I'm Eryn. You might be able to tell from my accent that I am not from around here. I flew over the big pond, and I am an independent consultant and a PHP developer. So before I worked for myself, I worked at an interactive agency, which means that people came to us and paid us to make them software. Spent 5 years there as a technical lead, and during that time, I was on anywhere from 3 to 9 projects at a time, which means I have failed fast a lot and had a lot of chances to make mistakes. So I've got a few war stories, and I guess the only good thing about messing up that often is it gives me something to write about to come here and tell you all about. So hopefully you can learn from these and do better than I did. That's all I want for everyone in this room. So we here today have sat through talks all through yesterday where we learned the best ways to do a lot of different things. Best practices for design patterns, ideas for using new things that might be new to us, like monads, all of these great ideas on ways to do things. But it's not enough just to strive to do things better, which we should be doing all of the time. We also need to have a plan for when, not if, but when things go wrong, because they will. Because who has ever, raise your hand if you've ever launched a sizable piece of software without a bug in it. Yeah, no one's even being a jerk, except for that guy. You're not even pretending, right? That's what happens. The best we can ask for is that it only sort of embarrasses us after we launch it. So we need to know what we're gonna do when these things go wrong. I basically think that there are 2 kinds of problems. You've got the project kind. So that's stuff like planning, client's budget. Now, I want to be clear, I used to work at an agency, so I had literally people who were my clients, and I literally had a budget with some money amount that I had to work to. But if you didn't do that, that's fine. This stuff still applies to you. I'm going to use my language when I talk about this, but if you don't have clients, just hear stakeholders. Hear management. Hear business analysts. Hear whoever it is that's telling you what you need to build. And if you don't literally have budgets, hear story points. Hear hours allotted. Or just hear the fact that you can't take forever to get something done if you want to keep your job, right? So we all are constrained by the idea of a budget, whatever it is that we're counting. And we all have clients because we're all beholden to somebody. The only exception might be if you run your own company, but then your clients are your end users. So it's still a kind of relationship there because you need to figure out what they want and what they want you to build, yeah? The other kind of bug are technological. So those are things that maybe we're a little bit more familiar with, a little bit more comfortable with. Things like bugs. There's always bugs, but really bad, wake you up from a pager at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning bugs. Those kind. Or outages, the whole server's down, which means that no one's making money anymore, and the clock is ticking. So we can kind of generally break the problems that you see in a project into these 2 groups. I have a story for each one. So the first one is going to be a project kind. I'm going to talk about people, I'll warn you. If that just made you shudder, hold on, we'll get to the technical stuff, I promise. But it is all important. I'm going to make a case as to why. And here's my first argument. All projects involve people. Doesn't matter what stack you write in, if you're a Laravel developer, if you're a Go developer, if you're doing both on the same project, if you're embedded systems, if you're Android, the one constant in all technology things is that there will be people involved. Even if you're just building it for yourself, you didn't get away with anything there because you're a person, actually. So there's always people involved. And although computers are great at doing exactly what we tell them, for better or for worse, people are kind of messy, yeah? People get hungry, and that makes them crabby, and they get tired, and they're kind of mad at you. And these all sound like design flaws, I am aware. But they're really just what makes us human, and it's things like these limitations push us to find better solutions. And regardless, they're not going away. So if we really want to be successful with our software projects, we have to accept the reality of the limitations of human beings and work with them. Actually, before I go on, I need to admit something. So everything I'm going to say is true, except for the parts that aren't. I'm going to have to lie to you. And that's because I am NDA'd. So I had to sign non-disclosure agreements, which means I can't really get into satisfying kinds of details. So all my stories are like, someone did a thing, and then someone did another thing. But the talk will still be good, I promise. But I've just changed little details so that like you can't go Google my clients later. Yeah? You'll still get the gist of it, I promise. All right, here's our first story. I call it Hierarchy Jenga. Do you guys have Jenga here? It's a game where like things fall over. Anyway, so the project, here we go. It's a medical services company, and they have a lot of locations across the US. You can kind of think of them as like a franchise. So the same way that there's like McDonald's and one person owns well, not one person, but there's a corporation, and then you've got individual places, and they're sort of controlled by corporate, but sort of not. Similar thing, but like with, healthcare. They came to us because they needed to update their site, because it was really hard to work with. So they had something custom that someone built for them a long time ago, and it met their needs for a while. It totally did. They had just outgrown it, and they were ready for a new solution, because they needed something that was easier to manage, more flexible. And we were like, great, that is what we do. We're kind of like CMS experts, so bring it. So we thought, this is in our wheelhouse, this is how we roll. We've made 1 million CMS projects. This will just be 1,000,001. Of course, it was not that easy, or I wouldn't be telling the story. So first, big problem is that every location has to manage their own content. And this is something that you actually see a lot, you probably just maybe don't notice. Like, for example, hotels. They have to do this because you have corporate that controls all of the Radissons, but then each individual one needs to be able to put stuff on there like, this is how you get to our front door, and here's parking information. And oh, this street is under construction, so don't go that way. So you need to find this balance. It's tricky though, because if you give users too much freedom, you get MySpace. So you gotta find that sweet spot between here's enough freedom to do what you need to do, but here's enough control that we're not embarrassed to have our brand on the website. So that was the first thing that was kind of tricky about this. Second, they had purchased another company and were bringing it into the brand, and they wanted us to do that with the website. And I realize this isn't a marketing convention, so I'll just say spoiler alert, that's not how it works. But that's what they wanted us to do. So that was part of the project. And third, they already had multiple brands to maintain. And by that, what I mean is like they would acquire a competitor, but like really like the name locally and not want to lose it. So they would just like pretend it was still the old company. But it wasn't. It was the new company. Or they would do crazy stuff. Like, I don't know if this is how it works here because your healthcare system makes so much more sense than mine. But sometimes in hospitals in the US, you've got different departments where it's actually a different company pretending to be part of the hospital. So it's like maybe the radiology is actually a company that is really focused on doing x-rays and imaging, and they just sort of put the hospital's brand on it. And it lets them specialize, and in this very capitalist way, it works better. Starting from the premise that our healthcare system works at all. Anyway, so it was really kind of complicated, right? Like we went from like, you need a CMS, do you want WordPress or Drupal, or like what can we do for you, to like, okay, this is really custom. This has to be really built from the ground up for you guys because your needs are so weird. So, all that said, that's manageable, yeah? Like, we're technologists, we design software, it's cool, we'll figure it out. But the main problem was that we couldn't get them to sign off on anything. We would send them a document and be like, here's the designs, and they'd be like, oh my God, I love it. And then we go, cool, and we'd like kind of start working with that, and then 3 days later, they'd come back and be like, okay, can you change the header and also this form over here, and we totally forgot about this. And we're like, whoa, 3 days ago you said this was good, like, what is happening here? And that just kept going, going, and going. So we had this planning process that was supposed to take a month, it took 4 months. And we still weren't ready to make a website. So everybody in the team is super frustrated. Because we're makers, right? Like, we accept that planning is kind of a necessary evil, but like, we didn't get into programming because we wanted to talk about building stuff. We got into programming because we want to build stuff. So our team was getting really frustrated with all this spinning our wheels and wondering what we were supposed to be doing and wondering why it wasn't working, because we were doing everything we knew. Everything that worked with every other client, we were doing it. So we had to kind of take a step back and think, what is going on here and why is it happening this way? And after some introspection, some team meetings, discussion like that, what we realized was it was ultimately that they were indecisive and they weren't taking the process as seriously as we were. That's obviously not true. Their business was on the line. I mean, they were taking this really seriously. This was probably more serious to them than it was to us, because they were just one of our many clients. But a business in this day and age, if it can't get a website that can get its information out to its consumers, it's useless. It can't make money. So we realized what we really needed to do was, rather than kind of sit and complain and be frustrated, because it felt very much like they weren't taking it seriously. Because how else do you get to 4 months, 3 extra months in a planning process? That's so much, like, they're literally paying us by the hour. I mean, it's so much money, it's so much time, everybody's frustrated, no one is happy. So what we did was we dropped back. We realized that the problem was that they're people, and they're complicated. And their motivations maybe aren't the same as our motivations. That didn't tell us what their motivations were, it didn't tell us what the problem was, but it gave us the insight that we needed to be like, all right, cool, this isn't about us. Like, we're frustrated, but we're the ones getting paid to find a solution. So we're gonna have to figure out what we need to do to make this better. So we use a technique called the 5 whys. I didn't come up with this, it's got a Wikipedia page. This is old school root cause analysis stuff. But what you do is you ask why 5 times. And the idea is that with every subsequent why, you get closer to the actual cause, which means you can fix it. So let's walk through this. All right, why won't they sign off on the UX? Natalie, not my client's real name, wants to change the sitemap again. Yep, we know that. That's why we're all frustrated. Cool, what happens next? Why does she want to change it? She thinks the marketing pages aren't, like, forward enough. She thinks people aren't going to see them in time. Fine, we know this. But why are we just hearing it now and not last week when you told us it was approved? Well, she just heard from marketing yesterday. We're 3 questions in, now we already have new information. Surprising and frustrating information, but new information. Cool, why did marketing not say anything until yesterday? She didn't show them the map until it was final. Which means that we had really different definitions of final. But this is a watershed moment because, well, 1, it made us realize we had really different definitions of final, but also, that's catastrophically new. So, last question, we get one more why out of our 5. Why didn't she show them sooner? It's too hard to work with the stakeholders and leadership, so she just avoids it. She avoids it as long as possible. Now we actually have an answer. We actually have some information that we can use here. So knowing that she avoids working with them means that we go through this whole process, we talk with her, we think she's shopping it around internally and coming back and being like, yeah, we love it. But what she's actually doing is waiting until we say, cool, that is final, so she can show her management, like, I only want to talk to you guys once, because you're terrible. So here it is, we're done. And then, of course, because they're management and they have to feel like they've done something, they say, well, you need to change these 8 things. And then the cycle starts again. So now we have a new answer. Because we have this information, we can figure out something else to do. So it got us to a resolution. And getting here took 4 things. The first one is empathy. I know, the E word, I know, but this is super important because if we hadn't taken a step back and thought like, okay, we're mad, But knowing that doesn't help. Where are you at? Why is this so frustrating? And what we realized was this poor woman was sort of like at the middle point of a pyramid on top of her, which was all of leadership, saying, this is your job. If you screw this up, you're out. And everybody underneath saying, well, I can't do my job if you don't get this website right because I can't run my clinic, so you need to have this and this and this and this. So she's under this immense pressure. I mean, unbelievable pressure. So realizing that, we were able to approach her in a way that let us connect. So we went and we communicated to her and we said, hey, look, everybody's frustrated right now, right? I mean, let's just put it on the table. Everyone's frustrated. How can we change this working relationship? And when we had that conversation, what we said to her was, we think we might get sort of where you're at, right? Like we know, like we're frustrated, but we know that this is so much harder on you. We know that you have all of this pressure and so on and so forth. And what that did was it built trust. It meant that she trusted us enough to give us information that she didn't think was relevant. It turned out to be crazy relevant that she wasn't showing her stakeholders this stuff until we were done, but she just thought of us as a vendor. She thought of us as someone she paid for services. So she wasn't telling us these things. But once we approached her and said, hey, let's have an honest conversation, human to human, and she was like, oh my God, everything's terrible. Touchy-feely, sure, but it meant that we could get our jobs done. So whatever you think of this process, if you're going, oh, this is someone else's job, oh, I'm not good at that stuff, oh, I don't know about that, we shouldn't need this in software, the bottom line is we weren't able to make software until we did this stuff. So this tool should be in our toolbox. We should be able to remember sometimes that the people making software are people. And we need to step back from this idea that everything can be taken care of in specs and with design conversations and recognize that sometimes people bring themselves, their emotions, their everything to this. And if we don't meet them where they're at, sometimes what that means is no one gets to write any software. Or at least no one's going to get paid for the software they write. The end result of all of this was we were able to be flexible. So what we did was we changed our process up. Now you need to understand that the place I worked has a very specific process that they use. They've been developing it over 10 years. They literally wrote and published a book about this process. So it is like gold. But in this case, it wasn't working. So we didn't throw the whole process out the window, but we flexed it a little bit. We were like, all right, cool, what's the parts that aren't working? And what we basically ended up doing was creating sort of like pretend interim deliverables that didn't take us a ton of extra time, that she could show leadership and have them feel good about like having input. And like don't get me wrong, sometimes I genuinely had things to say, but she could show them that and then come back to us. And so we kind of got like a little more agile, but it's an agency, so ultimately it's waterfall. We can fight about that later. That's not the talk here. But we were able to flex our process. And that, in the end, let us build software that I'm not there anymore, that company is still maintaining, running, adding to. So it made them revenue. And revenue means people have jobs. Most project and people problems are the result of mismatched expectations, a lack of communication, or probably both. Because if you have mismatched expectations, no one will ever be happy. We had different understandings of what it meant when she said final. So none of us were ever happy with the solution. And mismatched expectations happens because of poor communication. So if you are talking to each other, people may be disappointed that they can't get what they want, but that is a different kind of frustration than the idea that they think they know what they're getting and they keep not receiving it, right? So if you're on the same page about it, they can deal with the emotion of like, oh, I wanted that thing, but it costs money and I'm not willing to pay for it, versus, I thought you were gonna give me this. Where is it? But we never intended to give it to them because we just misunderstood each other. Cool, we're done with that stuff. We're done. You can stop holding your breath. I mean, I think it's really important, and I feel like, I don't know, 70% of the room's like, yeah, totally, but there's 30% of you that are like, oh my God, I hate this. So we're gonna talk more nerdy stuff now, yeah? So this is my second story. It's called More Money, More Risk. Goes like this. Here's the project. You know those websites where you see They're like, click here, and if your race car comes in first, then you win a $5 Starbucks card. Fill in the blank for whatever you actually win. Used to do a ton of those. Those were kind of like my bread and butter. Like I think I counted at one point, I've done like 40 different of those sites in that ballpark. So they're like a marketing tool for these companies. So when you look at this and you're like, why would they be giving this away for free? That doesn't make sense. It must be a scam. It is not a scam. I mean, it might be a scam, don't get me wrong. But that's because the scammers are doing it. When it's legit, when a company's doing it, not a scam. So the reason is that they could pour that money into like a billboard or a commercial, but they don't actually know who saw that. Websites have analytics. They can stalk you way better if you have to give them your email address and then click around the site. So they love it. They love the visibility into it. It's totally worth them giving away some stuff because it was just going to go get sunk into a billboard anyway. But here's what makes them tricky. In the US anyway, and I have to assume here, but definitely in the US, online promotions are legally regulated, which means that you have very specific laws that you have to follow, rules, so that you aren't accidentally running an illegal lottery, because only governments get to run lotteries, and only casinos get to have gambling. So when you do these things, you have a really specific set of parameters, and there's lawyers involved, and you have to get contracts written up and filed in all 50 states. I mean, it's really like chaos. And that means that there's real potentials for fines and lawsuits. An attorney general can come after you and say, dude, you either messed up how you did this, or you didn't follow the rules you said you laid out, and thus here is a fine. So this is like super serial. The other thing is that people will do things so far beyond reason for a $5 Starbucks card. Like, oh, the script kiddies I have seen. It doesn't even make sense. It's like you could take the time that you use to write that bot that's trying to break my site and just get a job and like buy some Starbucks. It doesn't make sense, but they're doing it for fun. They're not doing it for the monetary payoff necessarily. They're doing it because it's a challenge and because it's a thrill to get a bunch of free stuff, right? So these things have like e-commerce banking levels of security sometimes because we really have to, because it's gonna have, somebody is gonna try to break it. They always are. And the other thing is that this is all real money. Someone breaks my site and I'm giving away maybe coupon codes, and they take all my coupon codes, they have them. We don't have them anymore. So that's actual money dollars that we are responsible for having lost on our client's behalf. So you just gotta really take this seriously. So my morning, woke up to logs full of errors. See, marketers love launching these things at midnight for some reason. It's not like anyone was sitting there being like, all right, come on, 12:01. Like, no, but it just, I think, feels really satisfying to them. They're like, from midnight on this day to midnight on that day, which means I'm always up late launching these things. So I woke up, I probably slept in, and saw that my email was just full of alerts. It was bad. So at that point, I had two options. I could jump up, go on production, find the bug, squash it, maybe even check to see if it looked like anybody had actually exploited it, and then maybe even not tell anybody. No harm, no foul, right? Or I could be reasonable and I could like breathe a moment, and I can make a plan, and I can figure out what I'm gonna do about this. You need to have a plan. It's not an option. When you are in the middle of chaos and your adrenaline is going and you're really scared about your job and all this money you could be losing and you're frustrated and you're maybe a little embarrassed, you have to have a plan that you can follow. Human brains can only hold so much information. We can only put so much in there at once. That's why we have abstraction in programming, right? Like, we need to abstract away some of the details of things so that we can actually work with the finite amount of space that's in there. So you want to outsource certain things. You want to outsource any tasks that you don't have to actively think about. And this is why checklists are like my favorite thing. There's actually a book about how amazing checklists are. Like a book, like it's got pages, it's long. It's called the Checklist Manifesto, and it's sort of like a book about like weird medical stories masquerading as a project management book, which just means it's really entertaining. But in the book, he has tons of stories of times that checklists literally saved lives, because the guy who wrote it is a surgeon. He was in a World Health Organization committee to try to figure out how to have surgeons stop killing people quite so often. So surgeons would leave things in people a really uncomfortable % of the time. Like, they would forget to take out, like, they'd have 3 pieces of gauze and they would, like, take out 2 of them. Or maybe there was, like, a suture and they didn't remove the suture. So you just things where you open a person up and then you close them up, but there's still, like, things in there. And it results in people having to go back into surgery, which is really dangerous. So they needed to figure out how to make this stop happening, because it's expensive, it's dangerous, and it's totally unnecessary. So what they did was they invented checklists. There's a checklist of everything that came into the operating room. And before you stitch the patient up, the doctor and the nurse go through and say, cotton ball, other cotton ball, scalpel, scalpel. And they just make sure that they have everything. Yeah, sometimes scalpels were in people. Anyway, so they would go through this list and just make sure that everything that came in there came out. And it went from being like a double-digit % problem to being vanishingly rare. And these are surgeons. These are people who, at least in my country, are considered some of the smartest, most highly trained, most specialized people in the workforce. And they were doing stupid stuff that they fixed with a checklist. And that is because our brain can only handle so much. So the more that you outsource, the less that you have to actively think about, and the more you can spend your brain on solving cool problems. So let's talk about how to make a plan. It consists of 2 things: what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it. You wanna say how you're gonna get there, but it's more important to know where there is first. So you gotta start by saying what you're gonna do. What's your goal? Is your goal to truly fix this bug? Cool, that's gonna be one set of steps. Is your goal just to stop the money running out of your company? That's a totally different set of steps. Is it a security breach and it's so bad that you honestly should just take the servers down until you can figure it out? That's a different set of steps. So before you start racing into action, you gotta figure out what your desired outcome is. Once you know where you wanna go, then you can talk about how you're gonna get there. I'm a huge fan of incident response plans. Some industries, these are super common, super mandated. Other ones, you've maybe never even heard of it. It's basically a set of plans that you have that says, okay, when this scenario comes up, we'll deal with it this way. When this scenario comes up, we'll deal with it that way. And you can use it for things that you can kind of see coming, like AWS is down. Cool, what do we do next? Or we got hacked. Cool, what do we do next? You obviously can't foresee every problem. If you could, you wouldn't have them. But you can see a large number of them. And even for the ones that you don't have specific ideas of what's happening, you can start with a framework. Because there's so many things that you can decide ahead of time that'll just remove what you have to think about. So when an incident happens, how are we gonna talk about it? Is it in Slack? Is it over text? How are we gonna name the chat room? How do we know where to go? Who needs to be notified? How do we decide if we elevate this to the CEO, CTO? Can we keep it internally? Do we need to pull in someone from another department? How will we know which person to pull in? So on and so forth. So there are so many things that you can just sit down while it's calm and decide how you're gonna react, so that once everything is crazy and your hair's on fire and you're scared and it's all broken, you're like, all right, cool, what's the playbook? Pull out that incident response plan, start with what you have, and go from there. Another great thing about incident response plans is that they can come with an incident response manager. And this is a wonderful, blessed human being who, like when the server's down and the admins put a Post-it note on the door that says, we know the server's down, because they're really tired of everyone telling them? It's like a human version of that Post-it note. So it's somebody who is the point of contact. If you're remote, it's somebody who everybody knows, I am this person. I don't bug the people fixing the bugs. If you work together in the same building, they can literally stand in the doorway and be like, yep, nope, we know, go away. Yep, nope, they got it. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. So that person is awesome because they can do the communicating outward so that the people fixing the bug can focus on fixing the bug. Because communication is really important. Like, the people who are relying on these systems have a right to know. That's why we have status pages. The leadership needs to know if they're going to have to go make a really embarrassing, mea culpa to somebody. Like, people need to know what to expect. But if you're busy talking about it, it's harder to fix it. So you can have an incident response manager, and then you get a rapport. And they say, OK, how long is it going to take? And then the devs say, I don't know, but give me like 10 minutes to check into it, and I'll come back with a better answer. And they say, cool. And then in 10 minutes, they say, all right, you promised me. Where are we at? The dev goes, oh, my God, I'm sorry. I got totally off track. OK, 5 more minutes. And they give you an evil look. And then they say, OK, 5 more minutes. But anyway, it helps. It's like a mini project manager. It helps keep it on track. Helps communicate so that the nerds don't have to do it. When you build a plan, you have to put flexibility in it. Because you can make the best laid plan in the world, and if something on step 7 doesn't happen the way you thought, potentially everything after that is no good. So you can't build plans that are so rigid that if things don't go exactly how you think they will, your plan is useless to you. You have to build plans that have flexibility in them, plans that can withstand a little bit of I don't know what to do. Part of that is something called the commander's intent. This is a concept in the American Armed Forces, and very likely other ones, where you put the intention at the top of the plan. The idea is that if you tell people what they have to get done, even in the face of being confused or something going wrong, they can be trusted to make the decision that needs to be made to get them back on track. So a military example of this, a military example is, all right, we're going to go march 100 meters this way, then the platoon will be turning left, we'll go 500 meters that way, shoot at all the bad guys, and then walk to the top of the hill. That would be a plan without a commander's intent. What's the goal? I don't know. It's just a set of steps. Instead, what you need to say is the goal is to occupy the building up there by the end of this. Here's how I think we're going to do it. But if something goes wrong, your mission is to occupy the building over there. So now when they go out into the field and something goes wrong, because it will, because it's war, the troops have the training. They can be trusted to change on the spur of the moment. And we can do the same thing when we make our plans. Your coworkers are smart. No, they really are. No, really. You can trust them to make the right decision sometimes. And even if you feel like you can't, you don't scale, so you're gonna have to. So if we make sure people understand the goal at the end of this is to have the server down. The goal at the end of this is to patch this one part in a temporary way until we can come back and fix it for real. Then if your command has a typo, if you need them to run a script that doesn't actually exist in the location you said it did, they can roll with it. They can figure out where to go. But if you just make it a set of steps with no context, then these plans are kind of useless. Because the thing is that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Similarly, no launch plan survives contact with the production server. You think you have it figured out. You think this is going to be the one that goes perfectly, and you find a new way to mess it up. No DNS transfer survives contact with the client's IT. That is the hardest, easy thing in the world. I don't understand. And for sure, no requirements document has survived contact with C-suite stakeholders. So we cannot assume that our plans, as perfect and pristine as they are, will actually be executed the way that we envisioned. Instead, we have to accept that people will have to improvise and give them the tools to do it. It's super important to cultivate a shame-free culture, which means that people need to be comfortable enough admitting their mistakes to tell you about them. Don't point fingers. Don't assign blame. Don't use shame hats. I realize that there are a lot of people who like those, and I'm just standing on stage saying I don't think you should do that. Because what it does is it creates an environment where people, their first instinct is going to be to hide their mistake. And if you don't know about a mistake, you can't fix it. So you need to create an environment where people will admit when they have messed up. Because in a mistake that you don't know about is when you can't fix. You need to believe that people are willing to tell you when there's something wrong. But you need to fix the problems after they happen. So I'm certainly not saying that people should be not held accountable for their inadequacies if they're making the same mistake over and over again, or if they're being careless frequently. That's something that should be addressed. You should deal with that. But we still want to make sure that people can and will tell us when they've made innocent mistakes. Because the thing about mistakes is that it means you're trying something new. It means you're innovating. So if people aren't allowed to try something and screw up, you're gonna just do the same thing you've always done. And in software, that means you're gonna be obsolete in about 3 months if you use JavaScript. You maybe get 6 months in other languages. So we have to have cultures where it's cool to say, hey, I don't know this. Hey, I messed this up. Could you help me out, figure it out? Hey, I just borked this. I have no good explanation as to why I did this. I'm really sorry. Let's fix it together. So make any mistake once, but don't make it twice. Because making old mistakes is boring. I want you to make new mistakes. That's way more interesting. So what this means is that when we have an issue, we need to calm down, we need to make a plan, and then we need to prevent it from happening again. So you're not done just because crisis mode is over. You're not done just because you got to your objective that you put in that plan. You gotta circle back now. Did you put a nasty patch in there? Okay. How are you gonna get that out and make it the right fix? Did you pull the server down to stop the bleeding? Well, then you obviously need to figure out what you're gonna do to get back online. Is the problem a script that is just too easy to run with the wrong parameters, or maybe too easy not to run at all? Automate it. Automate everything you can. Add a new step to your checklists. Checklists are like regression tests for process. So you make a mistake, you put it in the checklist, now you never have to make that mistake again. You're free to make a new one. So you need to circle back. You need to make sure that we're always getting better, we're always improving, and we're not doing the same stupid stuff over and over and over again, because that's not progress. That's not a great way to make the money. So in the end, how did we resolve that promotion bleed when I woke up and had a ton of emails that I did not want to read? Everything I just said. So I woke up, I had my 60 seconds of panic because adrenaline is a hell of a drug. And then during that, I knew not to act. I had a brief moment where I had to convince myself not to just pretend it wasn't happening, because that was my first temptation. But obviously that was a terrible idea, and I did not do it. So I emailed my team, I said, hey, this is happening. I think I have an idea why. I'm coming in the office right now. Came in the office, grabbed a coworker who was pretty familiar with this part of the system. And I said, all right, here's what I want to do. And I had a list. I said, step by step, I'm running this command at this time. This is what I think it's going to happen. This is what I'm doing next. Does this make sense to you? And he looked over and he said, yeah, totally, that's what I would do. Makes sense. And then I had him sit next to me. He physically sat next to me and watched my computer while I did this thing. So we pair recovered from this disaster. And it was just to have somebody else who was sane, maybe someone with less adrenaline in their system, maybe just another brain, but somebody else to look over my shoulder and be like, whoa, 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 not that, this. Ran everything, totally ran without problems, without a hitch, fixed the thing, communicated with the PM who was acting as the incident response manager for that, let them know what was up. They communicated it outward, did whatever they do about deciding whether we're telling clients or leaders or whatever. And then we figured out how to make that never happen again. And in this case, what it was a script that was too easy not to run. It was a script that was absolutely essential to the process, and I just plain didn't run it because I missed it. So we pulled out our checklists and we updated them, and we added not only a line for Eryn has to run the script, but we added another line for the QA has to make sure that Eryn ran the script. Because it was essential enough that having two people looking at it was a pretty good idea. And it never happened again. Messed up lots of other things, but they were all new things. Never messed up that one again. So ultimately, chill out, make a plan, follow the plan. You can't change the fact that you're neurologically wired to freak out. Our brains are super bad at understanding the difference between the server is down and a lion is trying to eat me. They just are. They're neurologically totally very similar. But intellectually, we know that they're not. So you can't change the fact that you're going to get full of adrenaline when you see something happen that bad, if you're that kind of person. But what you can do is have this outside set of things that you've agreed as a team that you'll do ahead of time, so that even when you're freaking out, you can have faith in your checklist, faith in your process, follow it, until such a time that you are calm enough to make better and more rational decisions. So we do, in fact, have time for questions. Frank isn't here, so we have a new box thrower.
How to deal with that?
Sure, so I don't think the mic was on, so I'll repeat it. So the question was, I was pretty much talking about one project, one bug, and at kind of a contained scale. What do we do when we need to scale that up? And we're talking multiple projects, or we're talking multiple things launching at once. I have a few ideas about how I have approached that has worked. One is that, well, we take a cue from the DevOps community and we automate the heck out of everything. So the more stuff that you can automate, the less, just the fewer things that are gonna go wrong. I realize that is not an easy or free solution, but it is a really nice goal to get towards, especially if you are at a company or in a situation where you're continually launching a bunch of stuff at once. Remove people from the process. Another thing that you can do is we have used a document that we call a launch plan and a rollout plan, which are arbitrary names because we needed names for things. So a launch plan is essentially a giant checklist. So we just do that. But the rollout plan is a little bit larger context. And so what we do with that is it's a document that helps everybody who might have to touch this at some point get on the same page. So you have a section at the top that's like, here's the overview. On September 17th, we're going to launch these 3 sites at these 3 domains. We expect that we'll have to push code, do a DNS cutover, and replicate the database. And you just sort of have a high level, and then you gradually get into more detail. So maybe, depending on how long the rollout is, you have stuff we have to do beforehand. Stuff we have to do beforehand that's definitely due by Tuesday. Okay, this is what we're doing the day before. This is what we're doing the day of. And so you kind of can work down into the granularity there. And that helps coordinate the people side of it, where if you have something that big, you probably have lots of people on board. So that document gives people the context and prevents the situation where you're pulling in your sysadmin team and you're change the DNS, and they don't have any context about what it is that they're changing or why, which means that they are in a position where they can't roll with any punches. So you've maybe figured out that I am in favor of lots of communication and more documents when they're helpful, if they help expand the communication, not for their own sake, not for documentation's sake, but for the sake of making sure everybody can be on the same page. So I hope that helps. I'm going to be around all day. I love to talk this stuff. So come find me, ask Qs. That'd be good. All right, thanks, y'all.